Nice speech, but at the end of the day you're just a football player with money and a microphone. The words sliced through the marble corridor of the Marriott Marquis like a blade. Travis Kelce froze mid-step, his hand halfway to his jacket pocket. Around him, the post-conference chatter died instantly as 30 of Washington, D.C.'s most powerful figures turned to witness what would become the most viral moment in sports activism history. Ellsworth Grady stood at the center of a small circle of admirers, his silver hair perfectly styled, his expensive suit tailored to perfection. At 62, he commanded respect in financial circles across the East Coast and had little patience for what he considered celebrity activism. His smirk widened as he savored the shocked silence that followed his deliberate insult. But to understand why this moment would shatter both men's worlds, we need to rewind 30 minutes to when Travis Kelce walked onto the stage at the Bridges for Tomorrow conference, the most exclusive philanthropy gathering in America. The ballroom had buzzed with skeptical energy as Travis was introduced. No designer suit, no flashy jewelry, no entourage of agents, just him, a notepad with handwritten talking points, and the weight of being the only professional athlete on a speaking roster dominated by politicians and Fortune 500 CEOs. "Good evening," Travis had begun, his voice steady despite the measuring stares. "I know what some of you might be thinking. What's a football player doing here talking about social impact? 3 years ago, I would have asked the same question." A few polite chuckles rippled through the crowd. Travis relaxed slightly, finding his rhythm as he launched into the story that would change everything. "I thought my job was simple: catch passes, score touchdowns, win games. But then I met Marcus." The name hung in the air with deliberate weight. Marcus was 8 years old when I first visited the juvenile detention center in Kansas City. Kid was brilliant, could solve math problems I couldn't even understand, but he was angry, really angry. The room had grown quieter, skepticism slowly shifting to curiosity. Marcus told me something that night that changed my entire perspective on what it means to make an impact. He said, "Mr. Travis, nobody ever taught me what to do with all this energy except fight." That's when I realized football had actually taught me more about channeling energy, about teamwork, about perseverance through failure, than any business school curriculum ever could. For the next 20 minutes, Travis shared stories that had nothing to do with touchdowns or Super Bowl rings. He talked about Deshaun, the 16-year-old who'd been arrested for dealing drugs to help his mother pay rent, and how learning to throw a spiral had somehow taught him about precision, patience, and believing in long-term goals. He described the afternoon he spent with a group of kids from broken homes, watching their faces light up, not when they caught passes, but when they realized someone actually believed they could succeed at something. "Sport doesn't just build athletes," Travis had concluded, his voice carrying genuine conviction that surprised even the most cynical audience members. "It builds character. It teaches you that success isn't about individual glory. It's about lifting up the people around you. It shows you that failure isn't the end of the story. It's just the beginning of the comeback." The standing ovation lasted nearly 2 minutes. Travis could see genuine emotion on faces throughout the crowd, senators wiping their eyes, CEOs nodding with newfound respect. Even Ellsworth Grady had applauded, though his expression remained carefully neutral. But as Travis left the podium and began making his way through clusters of conference attendees, the real test was just beginning. A tech entrepreneur praised his foundation's innovative approach to mentorship. A retired 4-star general thanked him for his work with military families. Congresswoman Patricia Wells asked for his business card, expressing genuine interest in legislative collaboration around juvenile justice reform. The attention was gratifying, but Travis remained focused on why he was really here. This wasn't about building his brand or expanding his influence. It was about opening doors for kids like Marcus, Deshaun, and the hundreds of others whose stories deserved to be heard in rooms like this. That's when he encountered Ellsworth Grady and his circle of financial elite cronies near the main exit. Grady had been watching Travis's interactions with barely concealed disdain. As someone who'd built his reputation on being the smartest person in any room, he found the attention being paid to a mere athlete both amusing and slightly offensive. With an audience of peers to witness his intellectual superiority, Grady decided it was time to remind everyone of the natural order of things. "Impressive speech, Mr. Kelce," Grady had said as Travis approached, his voice carrying just enough condescension to make his true feelings clear. "Very moving. But let's be honest here. At the end of the day, you're just a football player with money and a microphone." And that's how Travis found himself frozen in that marble corridor, facing a moment that would define not just his own future, but spark a national conversation about who gets to speak on issues that matter. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. 24 of Washington's most influential figures held their breath, waiting to see how the young athlete would respond to such a calculated public humiliation. Some expected anger, others anticipated a gracious retreat. A few secretly hoped for a confrontation that would confirm their suspicions about athletes stepping outside their lane. Travis turned slowly, studying Grady's face with the same intensity he'd once reserved for opposing defensive coordinators, trying to decode his roots. He'd seen this look before, in coaches who doubted his intelligence, in commentators who reduced him to just his physical abilities, in fans who cheered his touchdowns but dismissed his thoughts on anything beyond football. But this was different. This wasn't about competition or strategy. This was about power, respect, and the desperate need some people felt to diminish others in order to maintain their own sense of importance. "I'm sorry," Travis said quietly, his voice carrying just far enough for the growing crowd to hear. "I don't think we've been properly introduced." Grady's chest puffed with self-importance. "Ellsworth Grady, Grady Financial Consulting. I've been attending this conference for 15 years, helping shape real policy, real economic impact, not feel-good stories about throwing footballs to troubled kids." A young congressional aide discreetly raised her phone, sensing something significant was about to unfold. Senator Wells frowned at Grady's tone, while several other conference veterans shifted uncomfortably, recognizing the dangerous territory this conversation was entering. Travis felt the familiar surge of competitive fire that had driven him through 2 Super Bowl victories and countless fourth-quarter comebacks. But this wasn't about winning an argument. It was about something much more important than his own pride. This was about every kid who'd been told they didn't matter, every person who'd been judged by their background instead of their potential, every voice that had been dismissed because it didn't come from the right place or speak with the right credentials. The response that came next would change everything. "Mr. Grady," Travis said, his voice still calm but gaining strength with each word, "I appreciate your perspective. 15 years is impressive. Tell me, in all that time, how many kids have you personally mentored? How many young lives have you actually touched?" Grady waved dismissively, his smirk faltering slightly at the unexpected directness of the question. "That's not the point. I deal with systemic issues, real solutions, not publicity stunts disguised as charity work." "Systemic issues," Travis repeated thoughtfully, stepping closer. "Like the fact that 73% of kids in the juvenile system come from single-parent homes, or that 87% will reoffend within 3 years without proper intervention programs. Or maybe you're talking about how kids from low-income families are 6 times more likely to drop out of high school." The statistics rolled off Travis's tongue with the precision of someone who'd done far more than just memorize talking points. Around them, the crowd grew larger as word of the confrontation spread through the conference. Phones emerged from pockets and purses as people sensed they were witnessing something extraordinary. Grady's confident expression cracked slightly. "Statistics any intern could Google," he shot back, but his voice lacked its earlier authority. "The question is, what are you actually doing to change those systems, besides showing up for photo opportunities?" Travis smiled then, not with arrogance, but with the quiet confidence of someone who knew exactly who he was and what he stood for. This was the moment he'd been unconsciously preparing for his entire life, even if he'd never imagined it would happen in a luxury hotel corridor surrounded by Washington's power elite. "You want to know what I'm actually doing?" Travis asked, his voice rising just enough to ensure everyone in the expanding circle could hear clearly. "Last month, I spent 3 hours in a maximum security juvenile facility in Detroit, talking to kids who've been written off by everyone, including people like you, Mr. Grady. Kids like Jamal, who's 17 and facing adult charges because nobody ever taught him how to handle his anger except through violence." The crowd was completely silent now, captivated by the intensity and authenticity in Travis's voice. Even the hotel staff had stopped their bustling to listen. "Jamal told me something that night that will stick with me forever. He said, 'Mr. Travis, I ain't never had nobody believe I could be more than what I am right now.' That's when I realized the fundamental difference between talking about systemic change from a conference room and actually creating it in the real world." Grady tried to interrupt, sensing the conversation slipping away from his control, but Travis continued with gathering momentum. "See, Mr. Grady, I think you and I have very different definitions of what constitutes real impact. You sit in boardrooms with people who already have power, analyzing problems from 30,000 feet. I get down in the trenches. I look kids in the eye who've been told they're worthless, and I show them they matter. You study systems from the outside looking in. I change lives one person at a time from the inside out. That's exactly my point, Grady said desperately, his voice rising with frustration as he realized his usual intellectual intimidation tactics weren't working. Individual feel-good stories don't solve systemic problems. You're applying band-aids to bullet wounds while patting yourself on the back for being charitable. The accusation hung in the air like a challenge. Several people in the crowd exchanged glances, recognizing this as the crucial moment that would determine the direction of the entire confrontation. Travis paused, allowing Grady's words to settle before responding. When he spoke again, his voice carried a depth of conviction that came from years of seeing real change happen in real lives. Maybe you're right about the band-aids, Mr. Grady, but here's what I've learned, both on the football field and in this work. Sometimes the most important victories aren't won in boardrooms or policy meetings. Sometimes they're won at midnight in a juvenile detention center when a kid who's never trusted anyone finally believes someone cares about their future. He gestured toward the crowd of powerful people surrounding them. Every person in this room tonight has incredible influence and resources. But influence without connection is just noise. Resources without relationships are just numbers on a spreadsheet. Travis's voice grew stronger, more passionate. You want to know about my scorecard? In the last 3 years, my foundation has kept 23 kids out of adult prison. We've helped 37 graduate high school when they were labeled as dropouts. We've gotten 12 kids into college who were told they weren't college material. And we've shown hundreds more that their zip code doesn't determine their destiny. The crowd stirred, murmuring among themselves as the weight of those numbers sank in. Dr. Sarah Chen, director of the National Institute for Youth Development, stepped forward from the back of the group. Actually, Mr. Grady, Dr. Chen interjected, her voice cutting through the tension with professional authority. Mr. Kelsey's foundation has achieved a 68% reduction in recidivism among participants, significantly higher than most federally funded programs. His feel-good stories are backed by some of the most impressive outcome data I've seen in 20 years of youth development work. Grady's face went pale. He'd built his entire professional identity on being the person with superior knowledge and cutting analysis, the one who could dismiss others with facts and figures. But he was discovering that Travis Kelce had done his homework, and more importantly, had lived his convictions in ways that produced measurable results. The difference, Travis continued, his voice gentle but unwavering, is that I don't just study these problems from a comfortable distance. I show up. I get my hands dirty. When Marcus, that 8-year-old I mentioned earlier, graduated from high school last spring, I was there in the audience cheering for him. When his mother cried because he was the first person in their family to finish school, I was there to celebrate with them too. He looked directly at Grady, and there was no anger in his eyes, only a profound sadness for what the older man was missing. Mr. Grady, I genuinely respect your experience and your expertise in financial matters, but I think somewhere along the way, you've forgotten something crucial. Behind every statistic is a human being. Behind every policy debate is someone's child, someone's future, someone's dreams hanging in the balance. Travis paused, letting his words sink in before delivering what would become the most quoted line of the entire exchange. And if my platform as just a football player gives me a voice to speak for kids who don't have one, then I'll use that voice every single day for the rest of my life. Because that's not a limitation, Mr. Grady. That's a responsibility. The silence that followed was deafening. Grady stood frozen, his carefully constructed superiority crumbling under the weight of Travis's quiet dignity and unshakable conviction. Around them, the crowd began to shift, no longer just observing a confrontation, but witnessing a masterclass in grace under pressure. Senator Wells was the first to break the silence, stepping forward with obvious admiration. Mr. Kelce, your foundation's recidivism reduction numbers are remarkable. They rival some of our most successful federal intervention programs. Other voices joined in, sharing their own experiences with community work and expressing genuine interest in learning more about Travis's approach. The young congressional aide who'd been recording discreetly began typing furiously on her phone, crafting a social media post that would soon change everything. As the crowd gradually began to disperse, people approached Travis to shake his hand, share their own stories, and exchange contact information. Grady stood alone, watching the man he'd tried to diminish become the center of genuine respect and admiration. For Travis, the most meaningful moment came when Dr. Chen approached him privately as the crowd thinned. Mr. Kelce, she said with obvious sincerity, I'd like to invite you to speak at our National Youth Development Conference next month. We need more voices like yours. Voices that understand real change happens one relationship at a time. Travis smiled, already knowing what his answer would be. I'd be honored, Dr. Chen, but only if we can bring some of the young people from our programs with us. They're the real experts on what works and what doesn't. Behind them, the congressional aide hit post on what would soon become the most viral video in sports activism history. By sunrise, the 47-second video clip had exploded across every social media platform. The footage, perfectly capturing Grady's dismissive comment and Travis's measured, powerful response, had been viewed over 3 million times. Not just a football player was trending in 17 countries, with athletes, celebrities, activists, and ordinary people sharing their own stories of being underestimated and fighting for meaningful change. Travis woke up in his Kansas City home to a phone buzzing with hundreds of missed calls, text messages, and notifications. His publicist, Sarah Martinez, was already fielding interview requests from major networks. His foundation's website had crashed from traffic overload, but it was a simple text from Marcus, now 19 and a sophomore at Missouri State University, that meant the most. Saw the video, Mr. Travis. You showed them what you always show us. That respect ain't about titles or money. It's about showing up and staying true. Proud of you. At his foundation office that morning, Travis found his team in a state of controlled chaos. Sarah was coordinating with additional staff brought in to handle the media frenzy, while program directors fielded calls from organizations across the country wanting to partner or replicate their model. Travis, this is unprecedented, Sarah said, showing him the analytics on her tablet. LeBron James shared your video with a message about athlete activism reaching 4 million people. Michelle Obama's office called. She wants to discuss potential collaboration. CNN, Good Morning America, 60 Minutes. Everyone wants exclusive interviews. But Travis was more focused on the email from Deshawn, the teenager he'd helped with college applications 3 years earlier, now a junior at Howard University studying social work. Mr. Kelsey, Deshawn had written, watching that video reminded me why I chose this field. You didn't just change my life, you showed me how to change others. That man tried to make you small, but you stood tall for all of us who don't have platforms or microphones. Thank you for proving our voices matter too. The email included a photo of Deshawn with 5 other Howard students who'd started their own mentorship program for at-risk youth in Washington, D.C., directly inspired by their experience with Travis's foundation. Meanwhile, across the country in his Manhattan office, Ellsworth Grady was dealing with his own social media storm, but one with very different implications. His consulting firm's phones were ringing constantly, but not with new business opportunities. Existing clients were questioning his judgment, his approach, his values. The video had exposed something ugly about his character that no amount of financial expertise could overshadow. His business partner and longtime friend, Janet Reynolds, didn't mince words during their emergency meeting. Ellsworth, this is a complete disaster, she said bluntly, sliding a folder across his mahogany desk. The Pemberton Group cancelled their contract this morning. Madison Financial is reassessing their partnership with us. 3 other major clients have requested meetings to discuss recent developments. Our reputation is in free fall. Grady sat staring at his computer screen, watching tweet after tweet criticize his behavior. Comments ranged from disappointment to outrage, with many people sharing their own stories of being dismissed or underestimated by people in positions of power. I never intended for it to become this, Grady said quietly, his usual confidence completely absent. He seemed so out of place there. A football player talking about social policy. That's exactly the problem, Ellsworth, Janet replied sharply. You've spent so many years believing your education and connections give you the right to dismiss others that you've forgotten how to listen, how to learn, how to show basic respect for people whose experiences are different from yours. She leaned forward, her expression serious. More importantly, you attacked someone who's actually making a difference. Those aren't just feel-good stories, Ellsworth. I did some research after watching the video. Travis Kelce's foundation has documented measurable impact. Their recidivism rates, graduation rates, college enrollment numbers, they're all exceptional. Back in Kansas City, Travis was preparing for his regular afternoon visit to the Juvenile Detention Center, a weekly commitment he'd maintained for 3 years, regardless of his football schedule, speaking engagements, or media obligations. As he drove through familiar neighborhoods, he reflected on how the confrontation with Grady had illuminated something important about his own journey. He'd grown up as the son of a blue-collar worker in Cleveland Heights, Ohio, where success was measured by how hard you worked and how you treated people, not by degrees on your wall or zeros in your bank account. Football had given him a platform and financial resources, but his upbringing had given him purpose and perspective. At the detention center, Travis was greeted by familiar faces, young people who'd been written off by society, but who'd found hope through his programs. Today's group included Keisha, 16, who'd been arrested for shoplifting food to feed her younger siblings when their mother was hospitalized, and Antonio, 17, whose anger management issues had landed him in serious legal trouble. "Mr. Travis," Keisha called out as he entered the common room, her face lighting up with genuine excitement. "We saw that video. You showed that old man what real leadership looks like." Travis smiled but quickly redirected the conversation in the way he'd learned was most effective with these young people, turning attention away from him and toward their own potential. "The important thing isn't what I said to him, Keisha. It's what we say to ourselves every day. Are we going to let other people define our worth, or are we going to define it ourselves through our choices and actions?" For the next 2 hours, Travis worked with the group on conflict resolution, goal setting, and practical life skills. These weren't photo opportunities or publicity events. They were genuine connections with young people who needed to see that someone believed in their potential for transformation. The session focused on a scenario-based exercise where participants practiced responding to disrespect and dismissal in constructive ways. Given the timing, it felt particularly relevant. "When someone tries to put you in a box," Travis explained, "when they try to limit you based on where you come from or what mistakes you've made, how do you respond without becoming what they expect you to be?" Antonio raised his hand. "Mr. Travis, can I ask you something personal? Why do you keep coming here every week? I mean, you're famous, you got money, you could be doing anything. Why waste time with kids like us who society has already given up on?" The question hit Travis harder than any tackle he'd ever endured. He looked at Antonio, angry, defensive, but with unmistakable intelligence burning in his eyes, and saw himself at that age, struggling with his own sense of worth and belonging. "Because, Antonio, you're not a waste of time. You're an investment in the future, and real investments require consistent attention, showing up even when it's not convenient or comfortable." He paused, choosing his words carefully, knowing they carried weight beyond this moment. "That man yesterday thinks my value comes from catching footballs on Sunday afternoons. But the truth is, my real value comes from moments exactly like this, helping you realize that your past doesn't have to determine your future, that your circumstances don't define your potential." Travis stood up, walking closer to the group. "Every single person in this room has been labeled by someone somewhere. Troublemaker, at-risk youth, lost cause, whatever. But labels are just words other people use when they don't have the imagination to see who you really are." As the session concluded, several participants approached Travis individually. Maria, 15, told him she'd been accepted into a GED program. James, 16, had been offered a job at a local auto shop through one of the foundation's employment partners. Small victories, but ones that represented fundamental shifts in these young people's trajectories. As Travis left the facility, his phone buzzed with a notification that would mark the next phase of his unexpected journey into national prominence. The Bridges for Tomorrow conference had issued a statement announcing a special session for next year's event, Authentic Leadership in Social Impact, featuring Travis Kelce as the keynote speaker. The invitation letter, signed by the entire conference board, included a handwritten note from the director. "Your response to adversity showed us what real leadership looks like. We hope you'll help us create a more inclusive dialogue about who gets to shape our society's future." But the real validation came in a follow-up message. Ellsworth Grady's speaking slot for the following year had been quietly cancelled, replaced by a panel discussion on dignity, respect, and effective advocacy that would feature voices from diverse backgrounds and experiences. Sometimes, Travis realized, the most important victories weren't about defeating opponents. They were about staying true to your values and letting that truth create positive change in the world around you. 3 weeks after the viral video, Travis received an unexpected phone call that would change the trajectory of the entire story. The voice on the other end was hesitant, formal, and unmistakably familiar. "Mr. Kelce, this is Ellsworth Grady. I hope you'll forgive the intrusion, but I was wondering if we could perhaps meet to discuss what happened at the conference." Travis sat in his home office, surrounded by stacks of partnership proposals and speaking invitations that had poured in since the video went viral. He'd expected many things in the aftermath: criticism, support, media attention, but a personal call from Grady hadn't been among them. "Mr. Grady," Travis said carefully, "I appreciate you reaching out. What exactly did you want to discuss?" There was a long pause before Grady responded. his voice stripped of its earlier arrogance. I wanted to apologize, not just for the cameras or social media, but genuinely. I've spent the last 3 weeks doing something I haven't done in years. Listening, really listening. And I've learned some things about myself that are uncomfortable. The conversation that followed was unlike anything Travis had anticipated. Grady explained how the video had forced him to confront his own biases and assumptions. His business had suffered, yes, but more importantly, his daughter, a social worker in Philadelphia, had called him to express her disappointment in his behavior. She told me something that cut deeper than any lost client, Grady admitted. She said, "Dad, you raised me to judge people by their character and their actions, but that's not what I saw in that video." She was right. I've become someone I don't recognize, someone I don't respect. Travis listened as Grady described the soul-searching that had followed. He'd reached out to colleagues in youth development, researched Travis's foundation work, and even visited a juvenile facility in Newark to observe their programs firsthand. "What I saw there shattered my preconceptions," Grady continued. "These aren't just statistics or case studies. They're human beings with real potential, real dreams, real challenges. And the programs that work, the ones that actually change lives, they all have something in common." "Which is?" Travis asked, genuinely curious about where this conversation was heading. "Relationship, connection, someone who shows up consistently and believes in these kids' potential when nobody else will. Exactly what you've been doing." 2 days later, they met at a quiet coffee shop in downtown Kansas City. Grady looked older than Travis remembered, his usually perfect appearance slightly rumpled, his confident demeanor replaced by something more humble and uncertain. "I want to do more than apologize," Grady began after they'd ordered. "I want to make amends, real amends. My firm has resources, connections, financial capacity that could support your work in meaningful ways." Travis studied the older man's face, looking for signs of performative remorse or calculated image rehabilitation. What he saw instead was genuine remorse and a determination to make things right. "What exactly are you proposing?" Travis asked. Grady pulled out a folder containing detailed financial projections and program proposals. "The Grady Foundation for Second Chances. We want to fund educational scholarships for youth aging out of the juvenile system. Full college tuition, plus mentorship support, plus job placement assistance after graduation." The numbers were staggering, enough to support 50 students annually for the next 10 years, but Travis had learned to be skeptical of grand gestures that weren't backed by sustainable commitment. "This is impressive on paper," Travis said, reviewing the documents. "But why should I trust that this isn't just an expensive public relations campaign?" Grady nodded, clearly expecting the question. "Because I'm not asking you to trust me yet. Trust has to be earned through actions, not words. I'm proposing that we start small with 5 scholarships this year. I'll work directly with your team, learn your processes, prove my commitment before we scale up." He leaned forward, his voice becoming more intense. "More than that, I want to work with these young people directly, not from a boardroom but in the programs themselves. I want to understand what I've been missing all these years." Travis was intrigued but cautious. He'd seen too many well-intentioned partnerships fail because of mismatched values or unrealistic expectations. "If we do this," Travis said, "it has to be done right. These kids have been let down by adults too many times. I won't be part of another disappointment." "I understand," Grady replied. "That's why I'm proposing something else as well. I want to make a public statement, not just apologizing for my behavior, but acknowledging what I've learned and encouraging others in my position to listen more and assume less." The statement, published as an op-ed in the Washington Post 3 days later, sent shockwaves through both the financial and philanthropic communities. In it, Grady wrote candidly about his prejudices, his privilege, and his misconceptions about what constitutes meaningful social impact. "I spent 40 years believing that credentials and connections gave me the right to dismiss voices that didn't sound like mine," Grady wrote. "I was wrong. Travis Kelce taught me that wisdom comes from experience, not just education, and that real leadership means lifting others up, not putting them down." The op-ed concluded with an announcement of the scholarship program and an invitation for other business leaders to examine their own assumptions about who gets to participate in important conversations about social change. The response was immediate and polarizing. Some praised Grady's honesty and commitment to change. Others accused him of opportunism and performative allyship. Business colleagues were divided, with some expressing support and others questioning his judgment. But for Travis, the real test came when Grady showed up for his first visit to the Kansas City juvenile facility. Dressed in casual clothes instead of his usual expensive suits, Grady looked nervous and completely out of his element. "Remember," Travis said as they walked through the security entrance, "these kids can spot insincerity from a mile away. They've been lied to, manipulated, and let down by too many adults. Just be yourself, your real self, not the version you think they want to see." The session was awkward at first. The young people were suspicious of Grady's presence and motivations, but something unexpected happened when Antonio, the teenager who'd challenged Travis weeks earlier, asked Grady a direct question. "So you're the rich old dude from the video who tried to put Mr. Travis in his place?" Grady could have deflected or offered a diplomatic non-answer. Instead, he chose honesty. "Yes, I am, and I was wrong, not just about Mr. Travis, but about a lot of things. I'm here to learn if you're willing to teach me." The conversation that followed was raw, challenging, and transformative for everyone involved. The young people shared their stories without sugarcoating their mistakes or minimizing their challenges. Grady listened without trying to offer solutions or impose his perspective. When Keisha talked about the shame she felt stealing food for her siblings, Grady didn't lecture her about better choices. When Marcus described the anger that had led to his arrest, Grady didn't offer platitudes about anger management. He simply listened, asked thoughtful questions, and treated their experiences with respect. By the end of the 2-hour session, something had shifted. The young people were still skeptical about Grady's long-term commitment, but they'd seen glimpses of genuine humility and authentic engagement. As they left the facility, Grady was quiet for several minutes before speaking. "I understand now why you do this every week. It's not charity work or community service, it's humanizing for everyone involved." Travis nodded. "These kids don't need anyone to save them. They need people to believe in them, support them, and give them opportunities to succeed. There's a difference." Over the following weeks, the unlikely partnership between Travis and Grady began to take shape. The scholarship program launched with 5 recipients, each paired with mentors from both the athletic and business communities. Grady continued his weekly visits to the detention center, slowly building trust and understanding. The story attracted national attention, not just because of the viral video's aftermath, but because it represented something rare in contemporary America: the possibility of genuine reconciliation and growth across ideological and class divides. But the real measure of success would come when the first scholarship recipients began their college journeys, carrying with them the support of an NFL star who'd refused to stay in his lane and a former adversary who'd learned to listen. 6 months later, Travis stood before a packed auditorium at the Kennedy Center in Washington, D.C., delivering the keynote address at the largest gathering of youth advocacy organizations in American history. The audience included many familiar faces from the Bridges for Tomorrow conference, but the dynamic had fundamentally shifted. Where he'd once been viewed as an outsider trying to prove his worth, Travis was now recognized as a leading voice in youth intervention and social justice. His foundation had received a $3.2 million federal grant to expand their mentorship model to 15 cities. Harvard's Kennedy School of Government was developing a case study on his programs. Major universities were implementing similar approaches to community engagement, but the most meaningful change was sitting in the front row. Marcus, Deshaun, Keisha, Antonio, and 12 other young people from his programs, invited as honored guests to share their own stories of transformation and leadership. 6 months ago, Travis began, his voice carrying easily through the packed auditorium, someone told me I was just a football player who should stay in my lane. He meant it as an insult, as a way to diminish my voice and dismiss my work. But you know what? He was absolutely right about one thing. I am a football player, and that's taught me everything I need to know about changing lives and building communities. The audience leaned forward, captivated by his presence and the confidence that had emerged from months of public speaking and advocacy work. Football taught me that success isn't about individual statistics, it's about making your teammates better. It taught me that the most important plays aren't always the spectacular catches that make highlight reels. Sometimes it's the unglamorous block that nobody sees that creates the opportunity for someone else to shine. And it taught me that resilience isn't about never getting knocked down. It's about how quickly you get back up and what you learn from hitting the ground. Travis gestured toward the young people in the front row, their faces beaming with pride and possibility. These extraordinary young leaders represent something much more powerful than any policy paper or funding initiative. They represent proof that when you invest in people's potential, instead of just managing their problems, when you treat them as partners rather than projects, extraordinary transformation becomes possible. He shared updates on their remarkable achievements. Marcus was now studying criminal justice with plans to become a youth counselor and was already volunteering with at-risk kids in his community. Deshawn had launched his own mentorship program at Howard University that was being replicated at 5 other historically black colleges. Keisha had been accepted to Georgetown University with a full scholarship and intended to study social work and public policy. Antonio, who'd initially been the most skeptical and challenging participant, had perhaps the most inspiring story of all. He'd not only graduated high school, but had been accepted into a prestigious apprenticeship program that combined technical training with college coursework, allowing him to earn both a degree and professional certification in renewable energy technology. But the story I want to share today isn't just about individual success, Travis continued. It's about the power of unexpected partnerships and the possibility of genuine change when people choose growth over defensiveness. The audience stirred with anticipation as Travis gestured to someone in the wings. Ellsworth Grady walked onto the stage, looking remarkably different from the arrogant financial consultant who'd confronted Travis 6 months earlier. Gone was the expensive suit and condescending demeanor, replaced by modest clothing and an expression of genuine humility. "Mr. Grady taught me something important that night," Travis said, his voice warm with authentic appreciation. "He reminded me that my platform comes with enormous responsibility. Every time I speak, I'm not just representing myself. I'm representing every young person who's been counted out, every athlete who's been told to stick to sports, every person who's been judged by their background instead of their potential." The standing ovation that followed was immediate and sustained, but Travis wasn't finished. "6 months ago, Mr. Grady and I were adversaries. Today, we're partners in something much bigger than either of us could accomplish alone. The Second Chances Scholarship Fund has now provided full college support for 25 young people, with commitments to support 100 more over the next 5 years. But the most remarkable transformation wasn't in the numbers, it was in Grady himself. He'd become a regular volunteer at juvenile facilities in 3 states, using his business acumen to help young people develop entrepreneurship skills and financial literacy. More importantly, he'd become a vocal advocate for giving young people from difficult backgrounds genuine opportunities to succeed. "I want to share something with you," Grady said as he took the microphone, his voice steady but clearly emotional. 6 months ago, I was someone who believed that credentials and connections gave me the right to dismiss voices that didn't sound like mine. I was wrong about that, and about many other things. He looked directly at the young people in the front row. "These remarkable individuals have taught me more about leadership, resilience, and integrity than 40 years in corporate America ever did. They've shown me that wisdom comes from experience, not just education, and that real impact happens when you're willing to listen, learn, and be changed by the people you're trying to serve." Grady's voice grew stronger as he continued. "Today, I'm announcing the next phase of our partnership, the Authentic Leadership Institute, a program that will bring together young people from underserved communities with business leaders, athletes, artists, and policymakers to create solutions to the challenges facing our society. The program would be revolutionary in its approach. Instead of adults talking about young people's problems, it would center the voices and perspectives of young people themselves, with adults serving as resources and supporters rather than decision makers. As the event concluded, Travis found himself surrounded by conference attendees wanting to discuss partnerships, collaborations, and new initiatives. The requests came from senators, corporate executives, university presidents, and non-profit leaders, all recognizing that authentic social change required authentic voices and genuine relationships. But the conversation that mattered most came later that evening, when he sat with the young people from his programs in a quiet restaurant near the Kennedy Center. "Mr. Travis," Marcus said, "when that man called you just a football player, did you know it would turn into all this?" Travis smiled, reflecting on the journey from that moment of public humiliation to this evening of celebration and possibility. "I didn't know what would happen, Marcus, but I knew one thing. I couldn't let someone else's narrow view of my worth become my truth." He looked around the table at faces that had once been marked by anger, hopelessness, and resignation, now bright with confidence, ambition, and purpose. "See, that's what I want all of you to remember as you go forward. Other people will always try to put you in boxes, to limit you based on their own understanding of what's possible. But your value isn't determined by their vision. It's determined by your actions, your character, and your commitment to lifting others up as you climb." Keisha raised her hand, a gesture that had become their informal way of asking serious questions. "So what happens next, Mr. Travis? Where do we go from here?" Travis grinned, the same competitive fire that had driven him to 2 Super Bowl victories, now burning bright for a very different kind of championship. "Next, we keep proving them wrong. One young person at a time, one community at a time, one conversation at a time. Because being just a football player turned out to be exactly what the world needed. Someone who understands that the most important game we play isn't on Sunday afternoons. It's every day, in the lives we touch, the barriers we break down, and the futures we help create." The hashtag Dark's not just a football player had long since evolved beyond defending Travis Kelce. It had become a rallying cry for anyone who'd ever been underestimated, a reminder that true impact comes not from titles or credentials, but from showing up with authenticity, compassion, and an unwavering belief in human potential. And in juvenile detention centers, community centers, boardrooms, and classrooms across the country, young people who'd been written off were discovering that they too were so much more than just anything. They were the future, waiting for their moment to change the world. In the end, Travis Kelce had done something that no touchdown pass or Super Bowl victory could accomplish. He'd used his platform to amplify voices that needed to be heard, created opportunities for people who'd been denied them, and proven that real leadership isn't about commanding from the top, it's about lifting from below. The boy from Cleveland Heights who'd been told to stick to sports had instead chosen to stick to his values, transforming not just his own legacy, but the lives of countless young people who would carry his lessons forward into a future bright with possibility.